Okay, we're now joined with Ben Gerner. He's an advocate for um, mental health and addictions and helping to break the stigma about addictions. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So, why do you feel it's important to work on breaking that stigma?
Well, I think stigma is probably the biggest factor in people not wanting to reach out for help. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
um, people want to hide. You know, people don't want their friends and family to know if they're using something. Not even, never mind being addicted, just plain using something, right?
hmm,
When I had my first cigarette when I was 10 years old, I didn't run to my mom and dad and say, "Hey, look what I did today," right? I learned how to hide it. And, part of that is because of the stigma, because of the propaganda and misinformation that's been kind of fed to us over the last 100 years from all sorts of sources. I won't go into that, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff about addiction and substance use that we believe, that we think we know, that is just not true. And we have to learn, we have to keep up with the science that's happening now. We know so much more now than we did in the past. And it's a lack of knowledge that creates fear, which creates stigma, right?
right. Now, the BC coroner's report was released this week, and it's stating that it's claimed over 2,200 lives here in British Columbia. What do you feel needs to be done to start combating these losses?
Yeah. So I guess my main message around that is, we're moving towards treatment, more access to treatment, right?
Hmm.
And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that for sure. I mean, we need that to happen. We also need treatment to be more evidence based. We need to come out of what used to work years ago and realize that we have to take new approaches. We have to include harm reduction throughout treatment programs and that kind of thing. And that leads me to the other part of the answer is, in Alberta, they opened up like 8,000 beds or something like that, um, thinking that, and they shut down harm reduction facilities, thinking that opening up those treatment beds would help. And the average person would say, "Yeah, great, that's going to help." But it didn't. The numbers still escalated. They're huge. The deaths were huge, and that tells me that it's not just a treatment um, infrastructure that we need. We need to address how the illicit drug supply is being poisoned,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Do you
So
do you believe in legalizing drug use?
I yeah, I do. I mean, I would love to end prohibition completely. Um, I've been told that's a step too far.
Yeah, is
Um,
that the answer though? I struggle with this as well. I'm like on one side and then the other side. Is that truly going to help loss, or would it not increase it?
well, let's look at alcohol. Alcohol was prohibited. When it was prohibited, people were dying from alcohol poisoning. They didn't even call it overdose then. They called
Mhm.
it alcohol poisoning, right? Today we call this overdose, but really it's poisoning. And the reason why it's poisoning is because of the iron law of prohibition. If you look that up, you can find out that the iron law of prohibition says that the more you criminalize something, the more toxic it becomes. So the more you criminalize alcohol, the more toxic it became. And so we had these stills and the moonshine and all that kind of stuff that was actually killing people
Hmm.
during that time. And they ended and the other half of that story was the increase in criminal organizations. So what happened was they ended prohibition. Now, alcohol's still a problem. It's still one of the worst drugs there are in
Hmm.
terms of harm, but you're not going to add to that harm with criminal sanctions, if that makes sense. So if I go out and buy a bottle of uh, vodka or a bottle of wine or a bottle of beer, I'm not going to get busted for that. So
Hmm.
my life isn't going to be destroyed by a criminal record.
Right. I just, this is what I see, and I'm in
Yeah,
recovery, so I'm not trying to, I'm trying to just
that's
understand this
okay.
because I'm like, what
Yeah,
is this? But I think of people, and myself, having used, what is, I get the there could be the criminal charges. However, aren't drug use and alcohol use still cause issues within the family? Can you show up for work? Can you can you do this, can you do that, if you're
oh yeah.
still actively using? So would
Yep.
that be the answer, or are we just creating more people that are addicted?
No, and in fact, if you look at the research across the world, when things have been decriminalized or the drug policies have changed, there was no increase in terms of new people using, right?
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So we've seen an increase a little bit with the legalization of marijuana.
Cannabis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With cannabis. And part of that is going to be because people aren't afraid to talk about it anymore.
Hmm.
Part of that is going to be that, right? People were using cannabis long before it was legalized, right? And as a counselor, I was talking to those people,
Yeah. Right.
right? And so when it was legalized, um, there was no evidence showing that there was any new use. And the same with things like in Switzerland, there's no new use of heroin, um, or very little, I guess. I mean, people start using it, but not because it's legal, just because they well, you know the story. You get involved just like with alcohol. You have a few
Right.
drinks
Yeah. Yeah.
and you learn that it really helps with stress and helps temporarily solve your problems and then creates more afterwards. I guess my point is, in order to end the crisis, absolutely we need treatment. It's not about addiction.
No,
It's,
no.
it's no, it's about people being poisoned. And when you end prohibition, or at least decriminalize it, and create an infrastructure of safe supply, then those people who are waiting to get help
Hmm.
have a far better chance of staying alive,
Hmm.
right, with a safe supply. And you probably know as well as I do that even going to a residential treatment program or a day treatment program or anything like that, relapse happens.
Hmm.
Right? It very rarely does someone go to a program or make a decision and go, "I'm gonna quit," um, and not
Yeah.
fall backwards sometimes, right?
Well, I mean that does bring me to my
Mhm.
next point is that
Yeah.
it's so hard for people to get into recovery as it is. It's hard for people to get into treatment centers. Also, from what I'm talking to with people, it's people that who are I guess what you would call functioning, and they're able to work and they want the help, but they can't find a program where it's kind of the 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 balance, right? Where
Yeah, yeah, something that's
yeah,
available
getting into
for
it.
them, right? Yeah. There's not much, I mean, the one great thing about, like, support groups like 12 Step and Smart Recovery is that the hours, right? Uh,
Right.
you're able to access them pretty
Yeah.
much at any time, whereas, the more psychological types of programs, like I worked in, are they're expanding now, but when I was working, yeah, we were done
Yeah.
at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and that was it. And we didn't
Yeah.
work weekends. Now that's changed. IH in Kelowna has changed that, and has expanded their hours significantly. So I'm really happy to hear that. But
Yeah.
but you're
I
absolutely right. You're waiting for that help, right?
yeah. Yeah. I do see the benefits of both paths. And I do notice too with the stigma of drug and alcohol use, going to those AA meetings, it's generally the old timers, but I'm noticing online you're seeing more people that are younger that are wanting to take those steps to live
Mhm.
alcohol and drug free, which is great. But how can we start working to better break down that stigma?
Well, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Um, the approach that I'm taking is, first of all, understanding why we believe the things we do about alcohol and drugs. We're brought up from a very young age being, like it was drilled into me. If I was ever caught smoking or ever caught drinking or ever caught using drugs, I'd be beat within an inch of my life or whatever. There would be some punishment. So I hid it, you know. Um, and I think, I guess I can't put words into the mouth of anybody else, but from what I hear from the thousands of people that I've counseled, they hit it too, and they were under the same thing. So basically, we've been programmed, trained to believe that drugs are bad. Rightly so, they are unhealthy. They can cause problems, all sorts of problems. But the what that turned into is, if you use drugs, then you're bad. You're
Mm,
a bad person if you
yeah.
use drugs. And families believe that, right? And this is so part of the thing that I work with families is try and get past that. No, your loved one is not a bad person,
No. Yeah.
right? You're in recovery. You weren't a bad person. I wasn't a bad person when we were using. Now we were probably very unhealthy, right?
Yeah. It's like unhealthy choices and decisions.
Yeah, but that's not a moral issue, and yet we've turned it into one,
Mhm.
and that happened 100 years ago. Um, Again, I won't get into details about that. There's lots of
Yeah.
information out there
Yeah.
about how the policies came into place.
Mhm.
A lot of them based on racism, for sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so we became bad people, and so now, in fact, today I was just involved in my keyboard warriorness. And someone said, well, we got to stop giving the junkies blah 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 and doing the
Mhm.
junkies,
Yeah.
and that person was in recovery, and I'm just saying, if we change the way we say things, we change the way we see things.
Mhm.
If I don't look at that person as a junkie, I look at them as a person. as
Person.
someone who is going through a hard time. I look at you, I look at myself as a person who struggled with something and got through it, you
Hmm.
know, right?
So
And go ahead, sorry.
I said so true. Yeah.
Yeah,
It takes a lot of work for recovery. It's a
it
lot of work.
does, it does. But when you look at comments, when you look at almost, I will say, the small majority of Canadians, despite the fact the vast majority of Canadians use substances, almost 80%, including alcohol, of course,
Mhm.
use substances, right? So considering that, this small minority of people are against, or are, how can I say that, view people who struggle with addiction as not as people,
Right. Like
right?
we're done with them. That kind of just
Exactly.
yeah.
And that has to stop.
Hmm.
That's the thing that we have to change. I run a family group right now every couple of weeks through Mom Stop the Harm, with people who are supporting loved ones who are still using. And, that's what we work on. We work on self-care for sure, but we work on how do you see your loved one? Do you see them as a
Yeah.
bad person, right?
Yeah.
Or do you see them as someone worth your love and your time, right?
Yeah. That's a great point. And as we wrap things up, so
Sure.
for parents and family that might have an individual suffering with drug and alcohol addiction, how can they access support?
Well, there's a few different ways. Interior Health has a family support group every couple of weeks, every first and third Tuesday, I believe. And all you have to do is call Interior Health and say you want to join. You don't have to go through a bunch of paperwork. Right now, it's all Zoom stuff. When I was
Mhm.
working, it was in person. I can't imagine doing this, doing those groups. Well, I shouldn't say that because I do. I run a group in Kelowna, called Holding Hope. It's through Mums Stop the Harm.
Okay.
You don't have to be a member of Mums Stop the Harm, but you can join Holding Hope by looking at the Mums Stop the Harm website, and it'll sort of guide you through to the Holding Hope Canada website, and that'll put you in touch with groups in your area, basically.
All right.
And yeah, and those groups are growing, and that's good. I'm glad, because families need help.
All right.
There's there's lots of other things online too. There's the families. It's called FAR, FAR. I can't remember the family something addiction recovery. Um, and then there's smart families programs. So there's lots of different programs across Canada that people can access.
All right, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.